I got a call past midnight that ripped me out of bed. 200 miles of black ice and screaming wind. Later I found my mom huddled outside a gas station, barefoot in the snow, her face bruised and her body shaking like a leaf. My own brother and his wife had beaten her and thrown her into the night like she was nothing. That moment carved something into me, a vow that they would never get away with it. What they did to her, I made them suffer tenfold. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reach. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. Please don't forget to subscribe, it helps more than you think. I'm Alexander Cain, and this is how my family tried to freeze my mother out of her own home, until I fought back. The call came at 12:07 a.m., dragging me out of the fog of paperwork and stale coffee. My apartment in Bozeman was dark except for the flicker of a crime show rerun on the TV. Snow smacked against the glass like 1,000 tiny fists, and the street below was already buried under a fresh blanket. I almost didn't answer the unknown number, but when I did, a voice cut through the static with the weight of finality. Officer Dawson Billings, PD. My mother had been found outside a Conoco gas station, no coat, no shoes, wandering in the storm, bruised, terrified, calling only for me. 7 years had passed since we last spoke. 7 years since she'd screamed at me for leaving home to study law, accused me of abandoning the family while she draped every ounce of pride over my older brother Jet. He was always the golden child, the athlete, the heir to the Cain name. I was the too sensitive one, the troublemaker. When I left, she made it clear I was choosing myself over them. I carried that scar like a brand. Now Dawson was telling me she refused the hospital, muttering that I'd know what to do. He hinted at something darker, signs of abuse, maybe worse, but she'd already withdrawn the accusation. My mother terrified, yet protecting the hand that hurt her. The paradox I knew too well. I didn't pack a bag. I pulled on my heaviest coat, shoved a first aid kit under my arm, and grabbed the keys to my old SUV. The moment I hit I-90, the world disappeared. The blizzard swallowed everything, the road vanishing under ice. Twice in the first 10 miles, my tires lost grip, spinning me toward ditches I somehow avoided. I kept my hands locked on the wheel jaw, clenched, refusing to turn on the radio. The only soundtrack was the wind howling like an animal, the wipers squealing over ice, my heartbeat slamming in my ears. The drive was a tunnel back through time. Every whiteout gust dragged up memories I had buried. Jet shoving me down the stairs when I was 9, the crack of my arm against the tile, the weeks in a cast while Mom scolded me for overreacting. Jet locking me outside in the snow, my teeth chattering against the glass door while she told me to stop causing trouble. I gripped the wheel tighter with every mile. By 4:15 a.m., after 200 miles of cold silence, I slid into the Conoco parking lot, tires screaming against the plowed mounds of snow. My headlights caught her immediately. My mother crouched between a trash bin and the frozen soda machine, hair tangled, lips cracked and bleeding, a bruise blooming purple across her cheek. She was barefoot, trembling so hard I could hear the chattering from yards away. Mama. I called, my voice catching on a word I hadn't said in years. She flinched, then stared at me as if unsure I was real. I knelt, wrapping the police blanket around her shoulders, pulling her against me, feeling just how fragile she'd become. "I'm fine," she whispered hoarsely, shaking her head. "Just slipped. Just clumsy." But her eyes betrayed her wild darting, afraid of a shadow that wasn't there. Officer Dawson stood nearby, leaning against his cruiser, face set hard. She said Jet put her out here. Then she changed her story. Said she imagined it. His gaze met mine. "You've seen the bruises. You know what's going on." I settled her into the SUV, cranking the heater as she curled into the blanket. For the first time, she looked at me directly, eyes glassy, and whispered, "Don't let him take everything." Then she shut her eyes, as if the words had escaped her will. The conflict was no longer abstract. It was sitting in my passenger seat, wrapped in a police blanket covered in bruises. Blood against blood, justice against silence. As I drove her away from the gas station, a question pressed against my chest like a blade. How do you convince a mother to tell the truth when the monster she's protecting is her own son? By dawn, the storm had eased, but Billings was buried under a white hush. I checked us into the only place that wouldn't ask questions at this hour, the Moonlit Inn, a tired motel with cigarette-stained curtains, a furnace that rattled like it might explode, and a lingering sourness in the carpet. I eased my mother onto the bed, the springs groaning under her small frame. I moved on instinct. Years of legal work taught me how to catalog evidence, but this was my mother, and my hands shook. I cleaned the split on her lip, wrapped her wrist where swelling pressed against the bone, dabbed at the mottled bruises blooming across her arms. I noted everything in detail: shape, size, color, location. I couldn't stop myself. It was equal parts son and lawyer. She held a cup of vending machine soup steam fogging her glasses, but her hands trembled so violently I had to steady it for her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Every time I tried, her gaze slipped away like a frightened animal. Her old flip phone lay on the nightstand, the screen flashing red 1% battery. I plugged it into my charger and skimmed the voicemails. One froze me where I stood. Jet's voice, low, cold, unrecognizable. "You've embarrassed me, Mom. Keep this up and no one's going to find you next time." I saved the file, my chest burning. When I asked about it, she shook her head. "You don't understand. He's trying. He just loses his temper." She spoke like someone rehearsing excuses, the same way she once excused him shoving me, locking me outside, breaking my bones. I remembered the last night we fought 7 years ago in this same city. She screamed at me in the kitchen, framed by those yellow curtains, telling me not to come back if I thought I was better than the family. She chose Jet's ambition, his charm, his legacy over me. I left that night and swore never to return. Now here I was, spooning soup into her hands as if nothing had happened, and yet everything had. I made a list in the notepad I carried everywhere: the Conoco station, our old house, Mrs. Callahan next door, the hospital records, the law office where those documents had been signed. Evidence had to come from somewhere. I sketched out my plan like it was a case for a client protective order, emergency guardianship chain of custody for digital files. When I pressed her, she finally whispered, "Don't dig too deep. Don't make him angry." Her fingers clenched around the styrofoam cup, knuckles white. I knew then this wasn't just fear. It was control, the kind of cage you carry inside. But cages have locks, and locks can be picked. I tidied the room, pulling the curtains tight against the gray morning. The lamp cast a dim circle of warmth on the bed where she drifted into an uneasy sleep. I thought of the neighbors, the papers, the house that no longer felt like mine. Somewhere in those shadows lay the truth. As I gathered her things, I found her worn leather wallet. Inside, folded between receipts, was a small paper planner. My breath caught. On the page from 2 months ago, in her familiar looping script, was written Montana Heritage LLC property transfer, a reference number, a lawyer's name, and tucked beside it a torn receipt from a notary's office. The first thread. Proof of a transfer she couldn't have fully understood, done under duress. Proof that what Jet wanted wasn't just obedience, it was everything. I slid the evidence into my pocket, the weight of it pulling me forward. The storm had nearly buried us, but in its wake it had left a trail, and I was going to follow it no matter how deep it went. The Cain house looked smaller than I remembered, though it still carried that false veneer of stability, the kind of place that tried to look wholesome from the outside. The paint on the siding was a weathered brown. The porch held the same rocking chair I remembered from childhood, and the curtains glowed faintly with a yellow light that gave off no warmth at all. Inside, the air reeked of disinfectant, as if someone were trying too hard to scrub away what lingered there. The hallway stopped me cold. Every wall was lined with photographs: Jet in his football uniform, Sienna at charity galas, their daughter Luna smiling with ribbons in her hair. My eyes moved from frame to frame, and not once did I see myself. I knew where I should have been, the corners of group portraits, but I was cut away like I'd never existed. One photograph, from Easter 1999, had a sharp edge, the part where I had once stood cleanly sliced out. I lifted my phone and captured each image. Proof of erasure was still proof. I knelt at the storage cupboard under the stairs. Dust covered the cardboard boxes stacked inside, but one was marked in black marker 1999 Alexander. My pulse kicked when I slid it open. Inside were fragments of my history treated like scraps. My high school diploma, the university acceptance letter I remembered being torn in half. Someone had taped it back together as if mocking the memory. A birthday card with "proud of you" written in large letters but no name signed beneath it. I placed them back carefully, then carried the box out to photograph its contents, keeping my breathing steady. The kitchen smelled faintly of bleach. I opened drawers until I found what I needed, a crumpled receipt from a local law office with my mother's signature at the bottom attached to the words, "Property Transfer Montana Heritage LLC." I snapped photos and immediately uploaded them to the cloud. The cloud had become my insurance policy, one I couldn't afford to lose. It was in the living room where the real revelation waited. A decorative vase on the shelf looked slightly off balance. Behind it, wired neatly against the wall, was a small device disguised as a baby monitor, but it had been pointed at the kitchen. I removed the memory card, slid it into my laptop, and pressed play. The screen lit with grainy footage. There was Jet, tall and composed, his face twisted in anger. My mother stood at the counter saying something I couldn't hear. Then his hand whipped across her face. She crumpled to the floor, her head striking the edge of the counter. Sienna walked past, expression blank, and with a swift hand she adjusted the camera to capture the aftermath more clearly before walking away. The timestamp read exactly 9:03 p.m. on the night of the storm. The air in my lungs went razor sharp. This was no longer whispers and half-truths. It was the undeniable record of violence. A voice startled me. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" Sienna stood in the doorway, silk robe cinched at the waist, a coffee cup dangling from her hand like she'd been watching me all along. Her tone was amused, but her eyes carried a hard edge. "You disappear for years, abandon your mother, and now you come storming in like some savior. It's pathetic." I set my phone to record, keeping my voice calm. What's pathetic is pretending this is normal. What I saw tonight will hold up in court. Abuse isn't something you can bleach away. She smirked. "You think anyone will believe you? You're the one who ran. Jet built this family, not you." I didn't answer. Instead, I slipped the card back into my pocket, already synced to the cloud. My work here was finished. Before leaving, I glanced at Jet's desk. Among his scattered contracts was one labeled consulting agreement, signed with the initials CH. My gut told me it was Caleb Holt, the businessman I'd heard about from neighbors. I jotted it down in my notebook. The symbolism pressed down on me as I walked out. The photograph with my face cut out. The camera hidden in plain sight. They had tried to erase me to hide her pain, but truth has a way of staring back even from the shadows. That night in the motel, I renamed the video file Marjorie, Re-Ween-40 Evidence, and uploaded multiple copies. Then without a word, I sent Jet a still image from the footage, his hand raised against her cheek. No explanation, no message. Just proof that I had seen everything. A silent declaration that the fight had begun. Back at the moonlit inn, the hours dragged heavy. The furnace moaned against the cold. The soup I'd heated for my mother filled the air with the metallic tang of canned broth, and yet she hardly touched it. She sat on the edge of the bed, blanket pulled to her chin, eyes fixed on the floor as if looking at me might set something in motion she couldn't control. I set my laptop on the desk and queued up the video from the Cain house. When I turned the screen toward her, her hands flew to her mouth. A strangled sob escaped before she forced herself back into silence. "It didn't happen like that," she said quickly, shaking her head, tears streaking down her face. I was confused. I fell. I imagined the rest. I crouched in front of her, holding her hand steady. "You don't have to explain this away anymore. You're not alone. I'm here now, and I'm not walking away again." Her shoulders trembled. For a moment she looked like the woman I had known before everything soured, before the favoritism, the fights, the years of silence. Then her voice cracked. "He said, if I didn't sign the papers, he'd take Luna. He said he'd send her somewhere I'd never find her. What was I supposed to do?" The words landed like a blow. This wasn't just about her safety. Luna, my 8-year-old niece, was caught in the center of it. Jet had threatened to use his own daughter as leverage. I swallowed the anger burning in my throat and steadied my voice. He won't take her. Not while I'm here. I dialed Riley Parker, a social worker I trusted in Billings, and explained everything. We discussed emergency guardianship, protective orders, immediate steps to secure both my mother and Luna. Riley's tone was firm. If I could provide the evidence, the court would listen. For the first time in years, I felt momentum leaning my way. But when I turned back to my laptop to draft the filings, the screen flickered. Lines of code zipped across, then everything vanished. The documents I'd been building gone. I tried the backups only to watch them dissolve before my eyes. My pulse surged. This wasn't an accident. My machine had been compromised. I ran diagnostics, but the results were clear. Someone had wiped me clean. My case was being deleted before it could exist. I knew exactly who had the resources and the motivation. Jet wasn't waiting for lawyers or court orders. He was already inside my files, erasing my foundation before I could lay it. The room pressed in tighter, the furnace clanking like a heartbeat out of rhythm. My mother sat silently, soup untouched, her eyes glazed over as though surrender were her only option. I knew then I couldn't fight this battle on my own. I closed the laptop, exhaled slowly, and made a decision. There was one person who could even the field. Declan Walsh, an old friend from Bozeman, the kind of man who could find a crack in any firewall and pry it open. I pulled on my coat and sat on the edge of the bed looking at my mother. Get some rest. Tomorrow everything changes. As she drifted into a shallow sleep, I slipped into the hall. The storm outside had quieted, but in my chest it had only just begun. The rusty spur smelled of stale smoke and cheap whiskey, the kind of place where secrets stuck to the wood-paneled walls. Neon beer signs buzzed faintly, and a jukebox played a country song that no one seemed to be listening to. A few heads turned when I walked in, the kind of cursory glances that said strangers were noticed here. I kept my hands in my coat pocket's phone already set to record, and made my way toward the bar where Caleb Holt sat nursing a glass of bourbon. He looked older than I remembered, though his frame still carried the kind of swagger that came with too many deals cut behind closed doors. He smirked when he saw me, as though he had expected this meeting all along. "Well, if it isn't the prodigal son," he said, raising his glass. To what do I owe the honor? I ordered a coffee I knew would taste like burnt ash, more for something to hold than to drink. "I came to ask about Montana Heritage LLC," I said flatly. His expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He swirled his drink, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light. "Careful, kid. You don't know what you're walking into." "I know enough," I said, keeping my voice steady. $200,000 moved from my mother's account without her consent, her signature forged. And somehow your name keeps circling the edges. Caleb chuckled low and cold. "You think you're the first Cain to try to dig around in family business? Jet has powerful friends. The kind that don't like being poked at." He leaned closer, his breath heavy with whiskey. "Do yourself a favor. Walk away." I pressed the record button harder in my pocket, as though willing the phone to capture every syllable. "That's not going to happen." His jaw tightened. Maybe the liquor loosened his tongue, or maybe he wanted to intimidate me. Either way, the truth slipped out. "You think Jet did this alone? I got 20% for making things disappear. Paperwork, signatures, problems like your mother. Everybody gets their cut." It was confirmation, clear and damning. My stomach turned, but I kept my face impassive, forcing myself not to show triumph. Declan's voice buzzed through my earpiece just then, his tone clipped. I traced the transfer. 200,000 straight into Heritage LLC. They funneled it out in smaller pieces. It's airtight proof of financial abuse. Before I could reply, a man on the next bar stool leaned toward me, his face hidden under a worn cap. His voice was low, just for me. "You're being followed. They've had eyes on you since the motel. Watch your back." The hair on my neck bristled. I glanced around the bar, every shadow now a threat. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, stood and left without finishing my coffee. The night air was bitter against my face as I crossed the lot. My SUV sat under the flickering streetlight. As I drew closer, I saw the spiderweb cracks in the windshield, the glass glittering under the lamplight. A folded scrap of paper was wedged under the wiper. I pulled it free. 2 words written in blocky handwriting: "Back off." I slid into the driver's seat, the note trembling in my hand. The warning wasn't subtle. They wanted me scared, silenced, but all it did was sharpen my resolve. The courthouse in Billings was a slab of cold stone and fluorescent lights. By the time we walked into the hearing room, the press had already gathered outside their cameras, flashing like a storm. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, the air too still, every cough echoing against the high ceiling. My mother sat beside me, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. When the judge entered, I rose. My voice was steady, the years of courtroom work guiding me even as my heart pounded. I laid out the evidence, the video from the hidden camera showing Jet's hand striking our mother, the voicemail, where his voice dripped with threat, the notarized transfer forms, the testimony from Mrs. Callahan next door, and the financial records Declan had unearthed. Piece by piece, I placed their cruelty on display. Jet sat across from me in a tailored suit, his jaw set, his eyes burning with rage, barely masked by a smirk. Sienna, polished in an elegant dress, crossed her legs and stared as though she were above it all. When it was their turn, Jet's voice rang out, smooth and practiced. "My brother has always resented me. He's manipulating our mother, twisting her confusion into lies. This is nothing more than revenge." The judge's gaze shifted to my mother. For a moment, silence pressed down on the room, and I feared she would retreat again into denial. But then she rose, shoulders shaking, voice trembling but clear. "I'm done being silent. For years I believed pain was love. I let myself think I deserved it. But no more. My son hurt me. He took everything from me, and he cannot be allowed to do it again." The room held its breath. Then Declan's prepared audio played through the speakers, his work having traced a private call. Jet's voice filled the courtroom, cold and venomous. "She's a burden. If she freezes out there, so be it." The words cracked the air like a whip. Jet's face drained of color as the crowd gasped. Before the judge could speak, Sienna leaned toward Jet, forgetting where she was, her whisper caught by a live microphone. "Did you delete the voicemail like I told you?" Gasps rippled again, reporters scribbling furiously, the gallery buzzing. The judge slammed the gavel, restoring order. His ruling came swift and firm. He granted me temporary guardianship of my mother, issued an emergency restraining order against Jet and Sienna, and ordered a full investigation into Montana Heritage LLC. The words echoed like thunder, final and unyielding. Jet's mask cracked. He sat rigid, stunned, while Sienna's composure dissolved, her eyes darting wildly as though searching for a way out. My mother sagged back into her chair, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear this time, but from relief. When the session ended, reporters surged toward us. Microphones shoved into my face, cameras flashing questions shouted. I shielded my mother as best I could, but even I couldn't ignore the sound already rising beyond the courthouse doors. On social media, a phrase had begun to spread like wildfire. "Freeze her out." By the time we stepped outside, the chant of the crowd filled the air. Strangers holding signs, voices raised, not in judgment, but in solidarity. My fight was no longer just mine. The silence had been broken, and the world was finally listening. The studio lights were blinding, harsher than any courtroom lamp or police spotlight I'd faced. They washed the stage in a sterile glow, stripping away any chance of hiding. Outside the Montana Chronicle building, the crowd had gathered in the hundreds, holding handmade signs, chanting in waves that rose and fell like surf. "Freeze her out" had spread beyond Billings, beyond Montana, catching like wildfire across the country. Now the story wasn't just mine or my mother's, it belonged to everyone who had been silenced in their own homes. Tessa Brooks sat across from me, calm and steady, her notes stacked but untouched. She didn't need them. The story had taken on a momentum of its own. "Alexander," she began, her voice cutting through the tension. "Take us back to that night. What did you see when you found your mother?" The cameras pivoted, catching my face in close-up. I drew in a breath. I drove 200 miles through a blizzard. When I arrived, she was outside a gas station, barefoot, shivering, her face covered in bruises. And it wasn't an accident. My brother and his wife put her there. They beat her and threw her out into the storm. My voice wavered, but I didn't let it break. She would have frozen to death if someone hadn't found her. That's not family. That's cruelty. A hush fell in the studio, and even through the glass I could hear the muffled stillness of the crowd outside. Tessa nodded, then cued the footage. On the monitor, my mother appeared sitting in the motel chair, her voice trembling. I used to believe pain meant love, she confessed, hands clutching the blanket around her shoulders. I thought if I endured it, he would stay. But I was wrong. The words cracked something open. My chest tightened as the audience gasped softly, their silence more powerful than applause. Then came the sound that would change everything. Declan's leak, timed to perfection, played through the speakers. Jet's voice, low and venomous, filled the broadcast. She's a burden. If she freezes out there, so be it. The effect was immediate. The reporters in the gallery erupted, typing furiously, cameras flashing. Gasps echoed outside, followed by chants that grew louder, angrier. My fists clenched against my thighs, my pulse pounding. The country was hearing the truth without filter. As if that weren't enough, Sienna's voice slipped into the feed, caught by a live mic earlier that day. I told you to delete the voicemail. Her own words betrayed her, confirming the scheme to cover it up. The audience roared in outrage, the crowd outside pounding on the windows of the studio. And then, in the middle of it all, a breaking news alert flashed across the bottom of the screen. Montana Heritage LLC, Jet's prized empire, had collapsed. A major contract had been canceled, investors had pulled out, and Caleb Holt had withdrawn his stake, now facing a federal inquiry into fraud and elder exploitation. The studio buzzed with shock as the announcement rolled across teleprompters. Even Tessa, poised and practiced, raised her brows in astonishment. I sat still, every nerve in my body electric. The truth was no longer something I carried alone. It was out there, irreversible, unstoppable. The bright lights above no longer felt like interrogation. They felt like sunlight. When the segment ended, my phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number glowed against the screen. "It's time for you to disappear." This wasn't a bluff scrawled on scrap paper. This was a threat with intent. My story had reached the nation, and now the stakes had reached me. March brought a slow thaw, snow retreating into muddy banks along the roadsides. I drove back to the Cain house with a deputy at my side and the court order in my briefcase. The house looked the same from the outside, but inside it was hollow, like a stage after the curtain has dropped. The smell of disinfectant clung to the walls, sharp and futile, as though scrubbing could erase what had been done there. I stepped through the doorway, the order in hand. This was the moment I had waited for, not vengeance, but closure. The papers granted me permanent guardianship of my mother and of Luna, along with the restitution Jet had been ordered to pay. The family he claimed to build now belonged to the people he had tried to destroy. Jet was already inside, pacing his suit, wrinkled, his hair disheveled. His eyes burned when they found me. "You think you've won," he spat. "You destroyed this family. You tore it apart." I met his fury with calm. "I didn't destroy anything. I'm rebuilding what you shattered." Then came the smallest voice in the room. Luna, standing at the top of the staircase, clutching the banister with both hands. Her voice trembled but carried through the silence. "I want to live with Uncle Alexander. I'm tired." The weight of her words dropped like a stone. Jet's face crumpled, fury turning into something brittle and desperate. He lunged toward her, but the deputies stepped in, pinning him back. He thrashed, shouting, "She's mine. You can't take her from me." The front door opened and more officers swept in. The restraining order had been violated the moment he came within reach of my mother and Luna. They cuffed him as he shouted, his voice hoarse with rage. Sienna stood frozen, her eyes hollow, mascara streaking down her cheeks. She said nothing as her husband was led away, her silence louder than his screams. As the officers searched the house, one called out from the basement. They carried up a hard drive, dusty and concealed beneath a loose floorboard. When accessed, it revealed contracts, forged documents, a string of names, beyond my mother, other elderly victims whose lives had been stripped the same way. The case was no longer just about my family. It had become a criminal network, and Jet was at the center. That discovery sealed his fate. He would face not just civil judgment but criminal prosecution, likely years in prison. Sienna stripped of her social standing, and business ties faded into isolation. Caleb Holt was removed from the real estate council, facing his own federal charges. The web unraveled completely. For us, healing began in a rented house on a quiet street in Billings. The walls were plain, the room small, but the light poured through the windows with a warmth we hadn't known in years. My mother planted daffodils in the backyard with Luna kneeling in the thawing earth, their hands covered in soil. They'll bloom even after the coldest winters, my mother told her. One evening I found a letter folded neatly on the kitchen table in my mother's handwriting. You never let me freeze twice. I chose wrong before. I see that now. Forgive me. I didn't need to read it again. The meaning lived in the way she now looked at me, the way she hung the restored 1999 family photograph above the mantel, this time with me in it. I continued my work no longer just as a lawyer, but as an advocate. Emails poured in from across the state from strangers writing, "I was your mother once," or "Thank you for giving me a voice." Each message reminded me that this fight was bigger than one family. One morning in March, I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, the air crisp, but not cruel. Children walked to school, laughter floating in the breeze. In the yard, Luna chased after the first green shoots of daffodils breaking through the soil. My mother watched from the window, her eyes softened, her lips curved in the faintest smile. The snow melted in patches across the grass, and yellow petals unfurled stubborn and bright. I whispered to myself almost in disbelief, family isn't just blood. It's the ones who help you heal. And with that, the story closed, not with vengeance, but with renewal. The storm had ended. What remained was the bloom of spring, fragile but fierce, a promise that even the frozen can find life again. When I look back on everything that happened, it still feels unreal at times. I replay the drive through the blizzard in my mind, the way the snow swallowed the road and the silence pressed against my chest. I remember the moment I saw my mother by that gas station, barefoot, bruised and shaking, and how something inside me split wide open. That image will never leave me. It was the moment I realized that silence can kill just as surely as violence, and that the cost of looking away is always too high. For years I carried resentment for my mother. I hated the way she favored Jet, the way she dismissed my pain and erased me from the family frame. I told myself I would never go back, and yet when the call came, I went. That drive wasn't just about saving her, it was about facing everything I had buried. The boy who was pushed down the stairs, locked outside in the snow, told he was too sensitive. He sat beside me the entire way. That night, I wasn't just driving to rescue her. I was driving to rescue the part of myself that had been silenced for decades. People ask me if I regret exposing my brother, if part of me wishes I had left things alone. The answer is simple no. Family is not defined by blood if that blood seeks to destroy you. Family is not about obligation if that obligation is used as a weapon. Family is about who stands with you in the storm, who warms your hands when you're frozen, who tells you the truth when lies feel easier. By that definition, my family is no longer the Cains of old. My family is my mother, who finally found the courage to admit the abuse. My family is Luna, who had the strength to speak when silence was demanded. My family is every stranger who reached out to say, "I was your mother once," or "I know your pain." That is family, the rebuilding, the healing, the choice to stand together. This story is not just mine. It belongs to every person who has ever been told to stay quiet. It belongs to every victim who convinced themselves that pain was love. It belongs to everyone who has been erased from their own photograph, cut out of their own history, told that they didn't belong. I want you to know, you do belong. Your story matters. Your voice matters. Even if it shakes, even if it cracks, even if it comes late in the night after years of silence, it still matters. There is a temptation in stories like this to paint justice as clean, to imagine that once the judge's gavel falls, everything is fixed. The truth is more complicated. Justice is messy. Healing is slow. Scars remain. My mother still carries the weight of her choices. Luna still wakes from bad dreams. and I still wrestle with the anger I felt for so many years. But we are moving forward. We are planting daffodils in thawing soil. We are letting light into rooms that once only smelled of bleach and fear. We are not perfect, but we are free. If you are listening to this, if you've made it this far, I want you to take something with you. Silence is the abuser's greatest weapon. Breaking it is the beginning of everything. I didn't want to tell this story. I didn't want to relive the cold, the bruises, the shame. But if sharing it means that one person finds the strength to step out of the shadows, then it was worth every word. Now I want to ask something of you. If this story resonated with you, if it touched you in any way, please let me know you're here. Comment listening below or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone is enough to keep going. And please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It might seem small, but your support allows stories like this to be heard by more people. People who might desperately need to hear that they are not forgotten, that they are not to blame, that there is a way out. I am Alexander Cain. My family tried to freeze my mother out of her own life, but we survived. We rebuilt. We healed. And if we can, so can you. So thank you for listening, for watching, for being here. Thank you for helping us turn a story of cruelty into a story of courage. And remember, even the frozen ground blooms when spring comes.